Ethan had spent the last 2 years working abroad, driven by the dream of providing a better life for himself and his wife, Lily. Every morning, he woke up with thoughts of her, her smile, the warmth of her voice, the way she used to rest her head on his shoulder after a long day. She had been his everything, and their love had once felt unshakable. Despite the distance, they kept their bond alive through late-night calls and heartfelt letters. Lily would always tell him how much she missed him, how she counted down the days until he returned. "Nothing feels right without you here," she had written in her last letter, and Ethan held on to those words like a promise. Now the wait was over. Ethan was finally coming home. His heart pounded with excitement as he stepped off the plane, inhaling the familiar scent of his hometown. It felt surreal to be back. He had left as a man filled with dreams, and now he returned with the means to fulfill them. He imagined the look on Lily's face when she saw him, the tears of joy, the way she would throw her arms around him. The thought alone made him smile. On his way home, he stopped by a flower shop and picked up a bouquet of lilies, her favorite. He remembered how she used to place them in a glass vase on their kitchen table, how she once said they reminded her of their love, delicate but enduring. He wanted to make the moment perfect. As he neared his neighborhood, nostalgia swept over him. The streets looked the same, but something inside him felt different. It was a strange sensation, like an unease settling in the pit of his stomach. He brushed it off, blaming it on nerves. After all, he had been gone for 2 years. Maybe he was just overwhelmed. When he finally arrived at his doorstep, he paused for a moment, gripping the bouquet tightly. He had envisioned this moment countless times, her opening the door, eyes widening in disbelief before she ran into his arms. But something was off. The house was too quiet. No welcoming scent of home-cooked meals, no music playing in the background as she usually did. His brows furrowed as he noticed an unfamiliar pair of shoes by the door, men's shoes. His grip on the bouquet tightened. Maybe she had visitors. Maybe a relative was staying over. He wanted to believe that. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Ethan stepped inside, his heartbeat quickening. The air felt different, stale, almost unfamiliar. He placed the bouquet on the table, his hands slightly trembling. His eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. A half-empty wine glass sat on the coffee table. A jacket he didn't recognize was draped over the chair. The unsettling feeling in his gut deepened. Then he heard it. Muffled voices. A soft laugh. The kind of laugh he hadn't heard from Lily in a long time. His feet moved on their own, leading him toward the bedroom. Each step felt heavier, the weight of suspicion pressing down on him. He reached the door, which was slightly ajar. His breath caught in his throat. Inside, Lily was wrapped in the arms of another man. Their bodies were close, their whispers intimate. The man's face was partially hidden, but Ethan didn't need to see it to know who he was. Daniel. His friend. Someone he had trusted. Ethan's chest tightened, his world crashing down in an instant. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The woman he had sacrificed for, worked tirelessly for, had given herself to another man. And not just any man, someone he had once considered a brother. He clenched his fists, rage boiling inside him. But something held him back. Maybe it was disbelief, maybe it was the sheer magnitude of betrayal. He wanted to storm in, demand answers, scream, break something, anything to release the pain clawing at his heart. But instead, he just stood there, frozen in place. Lily turned slightly, her smile still lingering from whatever Daniel had whispered to her. Then her eyes met Ethan's. Her expression shifted in an instant, from pleasure to shock, from warmth to guilt. She gasped, her body stiffening. Ethan felt sick. His presence alone had shattered whatever fantasy she had built in his absence. He could see it in her eyes. The realization, the regret, but not enough remorse. Not enough to erase what she had done. Daniel turned, locking eyes with Ethan. There was no excuse he could give, no words that could justify this. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Ethan didn't wait. He didn't need to hear whatever pathetic explanation they had prepared. Without a word, he turned and walked away. Each step out of that house felt heavier than the last. The life he thought he was coming back to no longer existed. The love he had believed in had been nothing more than a lie. The home he had dreamed of returning to had become the place where his heart was shattered. As he stepped outside, the cold night air hit him, but it was nothing compared to the chill inside his chest. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay. Ethan sat in a dimly lit hotel room, staring blankly at the ceiling. His mind replayed the moment over and over, the way Lily looked at him, the way Daniel stood there, silent and guilty. He had spent years believing in their love, sacrificing his time, his comfort, his very soul to build a future for them. And for what? To come home to betrayal? Anger simmered beneath his skin, but more than that, it was the emptiness that consumed him. He had dreamed of this homecoming for so long, and now he wished he had never returned at all. The irony was suffocating. He had worked so hard to give Lily everything, but in the end, she had given herself to someone else. By morning, Ethan knew he couldn't avoid it. He needed answers, not for closure, not for reconciliation, but to hear the truth from her lips. He wasn't the type to run away. If this chapter of his life was ending, he wanted to turn the final page himself. When he walked back into the house, Lily was already waiting. She looked pale, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words, but Ethan wasn't interested in dancing around the truth. How long? His voice was steady, controlled, but the weight of the question made the air between them suffocating. Lily hesitated, glancing at the floor before whispering, "A year." "A year." Ethan let out a slow breath, the number stabbing through him like a blade. He had been gone for 2 years, working tirelessly, thinking of her every single day. And for half of that time, she had already moved on. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she continued, her voice trembling. "I was lonely, Ethan. You were gone, and Daniel, he was here." Ethan let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. "And that justifies it?" She opened her mouth but had no real answer. Deep down, they both knew there was none. Love wasn't about convenience. Love wasn't supposed to fade because of distance. His gaze shifted to Daniel, who had been standing silently in the corner like a man waiting for his sentencing. "You are my friend," Ethan said, the words laced with quiet fury. "I trusted you." Daniel didn't even try to defend himself. Maybe he knew there was no point. Maybe he was just a coward. Ethan exhaled, his heart still aching, but the clarity of the situation settled over him. This wasn't his home anymore. The woman he had loved no longer existed. Whatever they had built, it was gone. "You made your choice," he said, stepping back. "Now I'm making mine." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but Ethan didn't stay to watch them fall. He turned and walked away, leaving behind not just a house, but the life he had once believed in. Ethan walked through the streets, feeling like a stranger in his own city. The place he had dreamed of returning to now felt hollow, stripped of everything that once made it home. He had thought betrayal would bring rage, but all he felt was exhaustion, an emptiness that settled deep in his bones. For the first time in years, he had no plan, no future mapped out. Everything he had worked for had been tied to Lily, and now that bond was shattered. But as the days passed, he realized something. He had been so consumed with building a life for them that he had forgotten to build one for himself. He stopped checking his phone, ignoring the messages from Lily. Apologies, explanations, desperate attempts to talk. None of it mattered. There was nothing left to say. He had given her his love, his loyalty, his years. If that hadn't been enough, then nothing he said now would change that. Instead, he focused on moving forward. He reconnected with old friends, people who reminded him of who he was before love had blinded him. He started running in the mornings, feeling the burn in his lungs, reminding himself that he was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than pain. One evening, he found himself at the airport again, watching planes take off. 2 years ago, he had left with hope in his heart, believing he was building something worthwhile. Now, he was leaving again, but this time, for himself. He booked a one-way ticket to a place he had always wanted to visit but never had the time. No more living for someone else. No more chasing dreams that weren't his own. As the plane took off, he looked out the window, watching the city shrink beneath him. Somewhere down there, Lily was living with the choices she had made. But Ethan wasn't looking back. He was done mourning what was lost. The past was behind him, and ahead lay a future he was finally ready to embrace, on his own terms.